Do you feel like you're always running? Even when you're standing still, as if your body is on the couch but your mind is stuck in a marathon that never ends? I want you to stop for a few seconds and answer honestly. Have you been waking up tired, even after a whole night in bed? Have you noticed difficulty focusing, memory lapses, more frequent irritation, constant anxiety, or that feeling that you are always on alert? If any of these questions resonate with you, perhaps it's time to look at this in more depth. We need to talk seriously about impacts on the brain and mental health, because what many people are experiencing today is not just ordinary stress. It's not just a difficult phase. It's a pattern of neural overload that is quietly becoming normalized. And when something dysfunctional becomes normal, it stops being questioned. You start to believe that living anxiously is standard, that sleeping poorly is inevitable, that a racing mind is part of the modern routine. Maybe you're trying to resolve this with more discipline, more productivity, more emotional control. Maybe you're trying to organize your schedule better, reduce distractions, wake up earlier, get more done in less time. But what if the problem isn't a lack of strength? What if it's not laziness, emotional weakness, or disorganization? What if what is happening is something biological, related to the functioning of your nervous system? We are the first generation in history exposed to constant stimulation on a massive scale. Notifications all the time, permanent digital comparison, pressure for performance, infinite information entering the eyes and ears without pause, internal demand to be productive, efficient, interesting, updated, external collection to respond quickly, deliver quickly, decide quickly. This volume of stimuli has direct impacts on the brain and mental health. The human brain was not designed to operate under continuous stimulation without real recovery. It was developed throughout evolution to alternate between moments of alert and moments of rest. There was danger, there was response, and then there was recovery. Today, the danger is not physical, but the brain doesn't differentiate that well. An ignored message, a criticism on social media, a financial problem, or a goal at work can activate the same threat system that, in other times, would be triggered by a concrete risk. When there is no true pause, the threat system never shuts down. The brain's amygdala remains in a state of vigilance. Cortisol circulates more frequently. The body becomes tense. The mind remains racing. And little by little, the impacts on the brain begin to appear in the form of chronic anxiety, difficulty concentrating, irritability, impulsivity, and mental exhaustion. And here's something important. This isn't drama. It's not an exaggeration. It's not a lack of maturity. It's neurobiology. It's an overworked nervous system trying to cope with a world that demands constant stimulation and offers little recovery. If you feel like you're always in survival mode, maybe it's not because you're weak, but because your brain is operating above its healthy threshold. If you've ever wondered why you're more sensitive, more anxious, or less focused than before, stay with me, because now we're going to dive into what really happens inside your brain when this state of alertness goes on, and why it completely changes the way you think, feel, and react. When you begin to understand that these impacts on the brain and mental health have a biological explanation, something changes inside you. The guilt begins to lose strength. Self-criticism is no longer automatic. You stop seeing yourself as the problem and start to realize that there is a pattern happening in your nervous system, and that is liberating because it changes the question of what is wrong with me to what's going on in my brain. But before we move on to the next part, I want to invite you to do something important. If you identify with this state of constant alert, with this silent anxiety, with this feeling of a racing mind that never slows down, comment below, "My mind is overloaded." Or if you prefer, write, "I am not alone." Others, when you comment, you transform an internal feeling into external awareness. And awareness is the first step to recovering mental health. Furthermore, your comment helps other people who are experiencing the same impacts on the brain to realize that it is not weakness, it is not laziness, and it is not inability. Often someone reads the comments and recognizes themselves there. And this creates connection, creates identification, creates a healthier space to talk about anxiety, chronic stress, and neural overload. If this content is already making sense to you, leave a like now. Like may seem simple, but it is essential for the platform to understand that talking about mental health, brain function, anxiety, and emotional regulation is relevant. The more this video circulates, the more people stop blaming themselves for symptoms that have a neurobiological basis. And if you want to learn how to protect your brain from excess stimuli, regain focus, restore mental clarity, and strengthen your emotional balance, subscribe to the channel now. Here we delve deeper into the impacts on the brain and mental health in a clear, accessible, and science-based way. Your subscription is more than watching videos. It's a commitment to taking care of your own mind. Now that you've realized that this state of constant alert is no coincidence, that there is a biological mechanism behind this mental exhaustion, anxiety, and difficulty focusing, the next question is, what exactly happens inside the brain when it stays in this threat mode for too long? That's what we're going to explore from now on. Now we're going to delve even deeper, because understanding the impacts on the brain and mental health requires you to visualize what's happening inside your head on a biological level. There is a small structure called the amygdala in the brain. It is part of the limbic system and has an essential function for survival, detecting danger. Throughout evolution, it was responsible for identifying real threats, such as predators, hostile environments, or immediate physical risks. The problem is that the world has changed much faster than the brain has been able to adapt. Your amygdala doesn't differentiate between a lion running towards you and 47 unanswered notifications on your cell phone. It doesn't clearly distinguish a concrete physical threat from a charge at work, a comparison on social media, or a subtle criticism that you've been mulling over in your head all day. All of this can activate the same alert system. And when this activation is repeated several times a day for weeks or months, the impacts on the brain begin to consolidate. When the amygdala goes into hyperactivity, it sends a clear signal to the body. Something is wrong. Get ready. This preparation involves the release of cortisol and adrenaline, an increase in heart rate, muscle tension, and constant vigilance. It's the sympathetic nervous system taking over. This mechanism is efficient when used for minutes, but when it becomes chronic, it stops protecting and starts to wear out. Mental health begins to suffer because the brain starts to interpret neutral stimuli as recurring threats. And the one who pays the price for this hyperactivation is the prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for focus, planning, decision-making, self-control, and emotional regulation. It is what allows you to analyze situations clearly, consider before reacting, and maintain emotional stability. But when the threat system is activated frequently, the prefrontal cortex loses efficiency. The brain starts to prioritize survival over clarity, and survival does not require complex thinking. It requires quick reaction. This is why you begin to experience increasing anxiety, racing thoughts, and overloaded mind, difficulty concentrating, and impulsive decisions. It's not an exaggeration. It's neurobiology working in emergency mode. The brain, trying to protect you, redirects energy to more primitive areas and reduces resources in the areas responsible for planning and self-control. This explains why, even though you want to stay focused or calm, you experience difficulty. It's not a lack of will, it's a redistribution of neural resources. When this pattern continues, another very common phenomenon appears that affects the brain and mental health: brain fog. Maybe you've already felt this mental fog. You wake up after a night's sleep and still feel confused. Read the same sentence several times and do not absorb the content. Enter an environment and forget what you were doing. Starts a conversation and loses thought in the middle of the sentence. This sensation has a biological basis. When deep sleep is impaired by excessive stimulation and continuous stress, the brain cannot consolidate memory or restore neural energy adequately. During the deeper phases of sleep, synaptic reorganization occurs, neurotransmitter balance and activation of the glymphatic system, responsible for eliminating metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day. If sleep is fragmented or superficial, these processes are incomplete. The result appears as cognitive slowness, difficulty focusing, and a persistent feeling of mental exhaustion. Without proper memory consolidation, you have more lapses. Without restoration of neural energy, the prefrontal cortex continues to function suboptimally. Clarity gradually disappears, and when clarity wanes, self-confidence can wane too. You start to doubt your own ability. You ask yourself if you are less intelligent, less productive, or less prepared. But it's not a lack of intelligence. And brain exhaustion. An exhausted brain doesn't create easily. He doesn't plan in depth. He does not regulate emotions efficiently. He tries to get through the day by conserving energy, prioritizes automatic tasks, and avoids complex cognitive effort. This can manifest itself as procrastination, distraction, or difficulty making important decisions. Mental health suffers because the feeling of not being fully functioning generates frustration and increases stress even further, fueling the cycle of neural overload. Furthermore, excessive multitasking fragments attention. Each change of focus requires energy. Each digital interruption consumes prefrontal cortex resources. Over time, this fragmentation reduces the ability to enter a state of deep concentration, impairing performance and increasing the feeling of unproductivity. The impacts on the brain are not just emotional, they are structural and functional. Maybe you're starting to connect the dots. Constant anxiety, alertness, brain fog, mental fatigue, difficulty focusing, frequent irritation. Everything is part of the same pattern of chronic activation of the nervous system. Understanding this changes the way you see yourself. You stop blaming yourself and start observing how your brain works more consciously. If you identify with this description, comment below "I'm in alert mode" or "My mind is overloaded." If you've ever felt this mental fog, write "I need clarity." Your comment strengthens this conversation about impacts on the brain and mental health and helps others realize that they are not alone in this process. And stay with me, because now we're going to delve even deeper and understand how this state of alertness and mental fatigue begin to affect your motivation, your mood, and your emotional stability in a silent way. When this constant state of alert and mental fatigue lasts for a long time, we enter an even deeper layer of impacts on the brain and mental health. We are no longer just talking about difficulty focusing or brain fog. We're talking about something that starts to affect your motivation, your mood, and the way you see life itself. Chronic stress doesn't just affect your external behavior, it alters your brain's internal chemistry. And two neurotransmitters play a central role in this process: dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is often called the neurotransmitter of motivation and reward. It is involved in the feeling of anticipation, the impulse to start tasks, the satisfaction of completing something. When the impacts on the brain accumulate from overstimulation, sleep deprivation, and continued activation of the threat system, dopamine can become less efficient. Not necessarily because it no longer exists, but because the receptors can become desensitized to constant and intense stimuli. This means that what previously generated enthusiasm now generates neutrality. Projects that previously aroused interest seem heavy. Goals that were once motivating now seem distant. You begin to realize that simple tasks turn into mountains. Replying to a message requires effort. Organizing part of the day seems exhausting. And then self-criticism arises. I'm lazy. I'm unmotivated. I don't have discipline. But procrastination, in many cases, is the brain trying to save energy. When the nervous system is overloaded, it reduces initiative to preserve resources. It avoids additional strain because it is already operating above the healthy threshold. It's not a lack of character, it's biological economy in the face of neural overload. At the same time, serotonin, which influences emotional stability, sleep, and feelings of well-being, can also undergo changes under chronic stress. When serotonin is dysregulated, irritability increases, frustration, tolerance decreases, and emotional sensitivity increases. Small setbacks seem bigger than they really are. Pleasure in routine activities decreases. Emotional energy fluctuates. These impacts on the brain do not appear abruptly, but gradually. It's not a sudden collapse. It's a silent change, almost imperceptible at first. Slowly, the risk of depressive symptoms begins to form, not necessarily as immediate intense sadness, but as persistent discouragement, reduced interest, a feeling of emptiness or apathy. You may continue to function externally, fulfilling commitments, but internally you feel like something has lost its color. This is one of the more subtle consequences of the impacts on the brain and mental health when chronic stress is not stopped. And when this drop in dopamine and this instability of serotonin combine with the hyperactivity of the amygdala that we have already discussed, a very common phenomenon arises: emotional dysregulation. Are you more sensitive? Do little things seem too big? Do simple comments seem like personal attacks? This happens because we have a clear equation going on inside your brain. Overactive amygdala plus tired prefrontal cortex results in emotional reactivity. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational analysis, impulse control, and emotional regulation, was already weakened by constant alertness and mental fatigue. When it loses efficiency, the amygdala takes over more easily, and the amygdala is fast. She reacts before you think. You respond on impulse. Raise your voice. Interpret a neutral message as critical. Then comes regret, and soon after, the guilt. This cycle is extremely exhausting for mental health, because in addition to dealing with external stress, you start to fight your own reactions. The feeling of being on edge becomes frequent. Sounds are more annoying. Comments hurt more. Frustrations seem greater. And the more you blame yourself for reacting like this, the more stress you generate, fueling the amygdala's hyperactivity again. What is happening is biological. Your nervous system is overloaded, and an overloaded nervous system interprets the world as a threat, even when it isn't. It increases vigilance, reduces tolerance, and prioritizes protection. This has a direct impact on the quality of your relationships, your professional performance, and your perception of yourself. It's not emotional weakness. It is neurobiological dysregulation caused by prolonged exposure to stimuli and stress. Maybe you are starting to see your experience with different eyes. That drop in motivation, that frequent irritation, that increased sensitivity may have a much deeper explanation than you imagined. When you understand the impacts on the brain and mental health, you stop seeing yourself as defective and start seeing a nervous system asking for reorganization. If you identified with this drop in motivation, comment, "It's not laziness, it's overload." If you've been more sensitive lately, write, "I'm on edge." And if he realizes that he has been reacting before thinking, he comments, "My nervous system needs balance." Your comment strengthens this conversation about mental health and helps other people realize that they are not alone in this process. Because in the next section we will talk about how to start restoring this balance and reprogramming the brain to get out of threat mode. Now we get to the most transformative part of this whole conversation, about impacts on the brain and mental health. After understanding the state of constant alert, neural overload, brain fog, drop in motivation, and emotional dysregulation, it is natural to have a very direct question: how to get out of this? And here comes something essential that I want you to record clearly. The brain is plastic. It changes. He adapts. He reorganizes himself. Neuroplasticity means that the same nervous system that learned to live in threat mode can learn to return to balance. But he needs consistent signals of safety and recovery. If anxiety has been a constant presence, the first step is to reduce the amount of stimuli that fuel this state of alert. Reducing digital stimuli at night is not just a generic recommendation, it is a strategy based on neuroscience. The blue light from screens interferes with the production of melatonin, impairs deep sleep, and keeps the amygdala more sensitive. Furthermore, content consumed before bed can activate comparison, demand, and urgency. When you create a limit on screens, you send a clear message to your brain that the day is wrapping up. This reduces activation of the sympathetic nervous system and protects your mental health. Another extremely effective tool for anxiety is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. By directing your attention to the senses, you shift the focus from catastrophic thoughts to concrete present stimuli. This change activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces the hyperactivity of the amygdala. Breathing with exhalation longer than inhalation is also powerful. When you prolong your exhalation, you stimulate the vagus nerve and signal safety to the body. This simple practice, repeated daily, begins to reduce the impacts on the brain caused by chronic stress. If your mind is overloaded, full of tasks and repetitive thoughts, brain dumping is a practical and underrated strategy. Putting everything that is taking up mental space on paper reduces the cognitive load. The brain was not designed to store endless to-do lists. It was made to solve specific problems. When you externalize these demands, you free up mental energy. Working in 25-minute focus blocks reduces fragmentation caused by multitasking. Every time you switch between tasks, you consume prefrontal cortex resources. Sustained focus strengthens mental clarity and reduces cognitive fatigue. Create a closing ritual. The entire day is also essential for reprogramming the nervous system. It could be reviewing completed tasks, organizing the next day's agenda, or simply putting away work materials and mentally declaring that the workday is over. The brain needs predictability. When you establish clear boundaries between productivity and rest, you reduce neural overload and improve sleep quality. If motivation is low, remember that action often precedes motivation. The 5-minute technique is effective because it reduces initial resistance. You don't need to complete the entire task. Just start for 5 minutes. This start activates dopamine circuits and can generate enough momentum to continue. Daily micro goals are more effective than long lists. Choosing a few essential tasks and completing them reinforces the reward system. Celebrating small achievements is not childish. It is a neurobiological strategy to rebuild motivation. In emotional regulation, the stop technique helps to interrupt automatic reactivity. Stop, breathe, notice what you are feeling, and proceed with intention. Naming emotions also reduces amygdala activation. When you mentally identify this is frustration or this is anxiety, you strengthen the prefrontal cortex. Strategic breaks throughout the day, even brief ones, prevent stress from accumulating. Cardiac coherence with rhythmic breathing balances the autonomic nervous system and contributes to emotional stability. To restore the brain more broadly, deep sleep needs to be an absolute priority. During sleep, neurochemical restoration, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation occur. Exposure to sunlight in the morning adjusts the circadian rhythm and improves serotonin production. Moderate physical exercise increases BDNF and strengthens neural connections. Contact with nature reduces cortisol. Real social connections offer emotional support and modulate stress. Small, consistent changes, repeated over time, reprogram the nervous system. Perhaps you are realizing that neural recovery does not depend on a silver bullet, but on intentional adjustments that send safety signals to the brain. Every conscious breath, every digital limit, every protected night's sleep is a step in rebuilding your mental health. If you recognized yourself in this process, comment here, "My mind needs to slow down," or "It's not weakness, it's overload." If you are willing to apply at least one of these strategies, write, "I choose to take care of my brain." Leave a like if this content made sense to you and subscribe to the channel if you want to continue learning about impacts on the brain, anxiety, brain fog, and emotional regulation. Taking care of the mind is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity. And in the next moment, we will delve even deeper into consolidating this new pattern of balance. Maybe you spent a long time thinking the problem was you, thinking that I lacked strength, discipline, emotional maturity. Perhaps you silently charged yourself, compared your performance with that of others, and concluded that you needed to be stronger. But now you understand something essential about the impacts on the brain and mental health. Your brain isn't broken, he is overwhelmed. And neural overload is not resolved with guilt. It is resolved with recovery, regulation, and awareness. If this video made you see yourself in a different way, then this channel is for you. Here we talk about anxiety, chronic stress, brain fog, emotional regulation, focus, sleep, and brain recovery with depth and clarity. So sign up now. Your registration is a commitment to your mental health. It's a decision not to continue living automatically and to start understanding how your own brain works. And if you made it to the end of this video, I want to acknowledge that. Staying this far shows that you really want change. You want to understand the impacts on the brain and you want to take care of your mind. Then comment below, "I choose to recover my mind." Or if this sentence makes more sense to you, write, "It's not weakness, it's overload." I want to read your comment and know who is determined to rebuild emotional balance and protect their own nervous system. Leave your like now if you stayed until the end. Likes help this content reach more people who are experiencing silent anxiety, mental exhaustion, and emotional dysregulation without understanding what is happening. The more this video circulates, the more people stop blaming themselves for something that has a neurobiological basis. And it doesn't end here. The next video that appears on your screen complements exactly what we talked about today. It will delve even deeper into the next steps to restore your focus, emotional stability, and mental clarity. So click on it now and continue this journey of neural recovery. Thank you for being here, for investing time in your mind, and for being part of this community that chooses conscience over guilt. See you in the next video.